Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're going to talk about prompting and feedback. We're going to talk about some strategies to intervene when students are doing something that's not acceptable during the call. And we're going to talk about some strategies to interact with them after, to give them feedback, and talk about debriefing. And some of you have been being FTOs for a long time and are already doing a lot of these things. Some of you may be brand new. And I'm hoping that we can meet in the middle and maybe give you some new techniques if you are experienced, and a framework to start using if you are a new FTO. So the objectives for this one is we're going to talk about building a safe learning environment, and that is where the student feels safe from being ridiculed or embarrassed after they don't do well on a call, and how to set it up so that they believe that you want them to succeed and that you're going to support them when things don't go well, and celebrate with them and give them positive feedback when they do something well. And we're going to talk about how to prompt in a way that patients receive timely care and the student understands why they're being prompted, like as the call's going on. And some of this is based off of crew resource management and some strategies that are used for working healthcare providers and like operating rooms, and how to interact across, where there's hierarchies of roles and titles. We're going to talk about some strategies to give feedback to students. A lot of times this is uncomfortable. We all like teaching. It's a lot more fun to do that than it is to give students feedback after they don't do well. So we're going to hope that make this a little easier for you and give you a framework to do that. And finally, we're going to talk about debriefing, which is different from feedback. And this is going through the call, or having the student go through the call on their own with you, and at all the points where something went either right or wrong, reflecting on that and using their figuring out how to get better and work on that for the next call on their own with your guidance. And this seems like a lot. This may seem like a lot, and we understand that you will not be able to do all of the things we're going to talk about today every day. If you're back-to-back calls, it's the end of the day, and some patients are so sick, you're not going to have time to have the dialogue that we're talking about. And that is okay. We understand all of that. We just think that if you can do most of these things, most of the time, the students will progress the fastest and move on and take the most away from the context that they go on with you. So a few things to consider. We want our students need to deliver safe, timely, and appropriate care on their own. That's what we expect the day that they graduate, that they're clinically proficient. And I am always asking, every time I talk to someone, how are our graduates doing? What do they need more work on? Is there a way that we can reallocate our time better? And so I'm always trying to tweak things and value your feedback about how we can reach this goal better. And then we'll be interacting throughout the summer, and I'll be asking you that as well. And so from the education literature, students feel safe or progress the fastest when they feel safe in their environment. That means that they believe that their FTO wants them to succeed, that their FTO will support them after something doesn't go well, after a contact doesn't go well, and that they won't be ridiculed or punished in any way after something doesn't go well. Now, the other side of that is if they don't feel safe, they're not going to respond as well to your feedback. They're gonna not perform as well, and we'll see why in a couple slides here. And if they do feel safe, I know that there's no FTOs in Delaware that ridicule people or punish or do anything like that when someone doesn't do well, but I heard that there may be some in other states. And if they feel safe with you, you can be tougher. You can push them beyond their comfort zone even further. And you can be more direct with feedback, and you can accomplish all the same things that maybe their FTO who does seem tough and not as nice to work with is trying to do. So if you set this up in the beginning, it'll pay off later. Students also learn the best and progress the fastest when they figure things out on their own, rather than just being told. It's kind of like doing research on your own or doing projects, rather than just being told by a teacher in the front of the room. So we're going to talk about some ways to help facilitate that. We're going to talk about how students can reflect on new situations, on what things that happen and apply it to new situations. And the last thing to consider is coaching and evaluating are always competing with each other. And this is really hard because FTOs do both. You're helping build them up, but at the end, you are trying to evaluate them and making sure that they are competent when they finish. So we're going to go through some strategies about how to manage that and try to sequence the feedback and debriefing with that in mind. So deliberate practice, this is, there's a psychologist, Anders Ericsson, has written about this. And this is, it's used by athletes and musicians and all sorts of different high performers. This graph came out of the pre-hospital emergency care, or the NAMSP put out some airway education, or a series of airway position statements. And this one came from education. And you notice where entry level competence is. And if you continue to practice with these things, with clear goals. So if you're practicing airway management, you are increasing the level of difficulty. Maybe you're timing yourself and you want to do things faster. So you always have a goal in mind, and then how can you're working towards achieving that. And as you achieve it, then you get new ones that are more difficult. It involves evaluating your self performance. And sometimes, like practice, you do this with videos, but going back and reflecting what happened and how can it be better. And with deliberate practice, they need feedback from coaches. And this is you. You are the ones that are guiding them through these contacts. This is kind of like, feel is kind of like the preseason game where you're guiding the players through something. You're helping them reflect after, and then you're repeating practice. So we're going to do that, on if you have time between calls. I know that a lot of times you have mannequins at the station or something that they'll practice on, or maybe redo calls, and we're gonna do that in the lab. So where the students are, so this is cognitive load, and most of us operate, most of you as FTOs operate most of the time in that middle green zone, where your experience, you're excited, you're not on that bottom line of deliberate practice. You continue to work and teach and do simulation competitions and great things, and you're ready, and you live there, and not as much really scares you on the way to calls anymore. But maybe when you were new, if you think back to your first day, you were somewhere in that red area where you are anxious. These are all new situations that you haven't been in before, and you have less working memory. So maybe you may have learned something in class, but in the moment when you need it, you can't recall it. You lose fine motor skills. So however you get at the skills in the lab, you're going to lose a little bit when you're on a call with a real patient. And you also get tunnel vision. Your field of vision literally does narrow, and you're going to miss things around you. And so the more practice that we do, and the more experience you get in the field, and the more work you do on your own, but self-reflection and practice outside of your shifts, the more you can shift towards the green area. And cognitive load, there's two types of cognitive load. One's intrinsic load and one's extrinsic. So the intrinsic is they're just managing patient care. This is the patients in front of them. Maybe it's complicated. They're in their head. They're just focused on trying to take care of what's in front of them. And this extrinsic load is this dialogue that they're having in the back of their mind. Am I going to pass? How many team leads do I need to pass? What priority patients? This is going to be a priority 2 or 3 patients for me to get credit for it. What does BLS or what does the partner think of me right now? Am I doing okay for them? And what's the FTO going to say after the call? And then finally, am I good enough to do this? You're questioning your values if on calls. And all of this detracts from the task in front of them. And they're not going to perform as well. And everyone at some level is capable of performing than whatever they are doing when they're on the stress. So think of this, the extrinsic load is like crowd noise when a team is playing away. That's distracting them from playing the game. So when we prompt them, there is a few things that we can do. We cannot eliminate the extrinsic load. One of the things that just being watched contributes to extrinsic load and adds to stress, and we cannot account for that. There are going to be personalities on scene. There's going to be other things that we cannot account for, that we can't take care of. But this is one of the things with prompting that we can do, because if you prompt them, if you simply say, the patient needs aspirin, and the patient may not have chest pain, but maybe it's a silent, ischemic event or something. And you just say, give him aspirin, then they're going to be like, why is he giving me aspirin? I don't understand. He doesn't have chest pain. So if you have a framework to do that, you can communicate that very quickly by using the S-bar. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard this already. It comes from team steps, which is from the team strategies and tools to enhance performance and patient safety. And this is one of the things that is used in hospitals and operating rooms where experienced people are all working. And the first thing is the situation background assessment response. And I saw this, I was working BLS, and I had an opioid overdose where the paramedics were precepting a candidate that was one of our graduates. And I don't know if the FTO was doing this, but we had moved the patient to the ambulance, and the paramedic had given nasal Narcan, and a few minutes went by, and he started breathing a little bit on his own, but it was still shallow. And his pulse ox went up to 92%, but it was kind of hanging out there. And we all everybody knew to give Narcan, but now we're kind of in this window where the patient's not stable yet, but not getting worse in front of us either. So the paramedic said to the candidate, well, what's going on right now? Like, well, he's breathing, and it looks like he might be moving his jaw a little bit, but it's not great. And he's like, okay, well, how do we get here? And she's like, well, he was overdosed on heroin and he wasn't breathing. Okay, so what do you think this means? Well, I think the Narcan's working, but we might need to give him more. So, okay, well, what do you think we should do? Let's try giving him some oxygen now and see what happens with that. And so we ended up giving him a nasal cannula, and he woke up a couple of minutes later. We could have redosed Narcan, we could have kept bagging. There's a whole bunch of things, but he had this dialogue, and at this case, we had the time to do the dialogue. One thing would be, another example would be tachycardia. Patients, focus on tachycardia, and they see it, and they all immediately want to cardiovert or give cardizem or something. And you see that the patient has maybe have sepsis. And that's a way that you could use this. The student would tell you, I see the tachycardia. And you ask, well, what led up to this? Well, the patient had a fever and hasn't been feeling well lately. Well, what do you think that means? And, maybe the tachycardia is compensating for that. Like, okay, well, what do you think we should do? Well, now we should give IV fluid. So you're giving, these are prompts. This was the prompting was this, you had to redirect the student away from the tachycardia. But by having this structured conversation, they understand this. They learn it. They understand why you prompted, and they understand why you prompted. And they can use that information to move on into the call. So this is another prompting strategy that comes from team steps, and it's called appreciative inquiry. And again, it's also meant for this is something where this is a more urgent situation. Maybe the student's about to do something that's unsafe or wrong. and they're going to do something that needs to be fixed. And this dialogue can be adjusted a little bit. It's for colleagues working together, and there's a clear hierarchy between the student and you. So it's a little bit different, but the framework is get their attention. So you can say the student's name, so everybody he knows or she knows who you're talking to and who you're addressing. Tell the student what needs to change. There's a problem. So, Bill, I noticed there's a tourniquet on the patient's arm after you've started your IV. And then we're going to offer a solution. And if we're all colleagues working together in a team, you can offer a solution. But if you're the one communicating with the student, you're giving them the solution. You're not offering, you're telling them politely. And in this case, that we pull the tourniquet off. And then last part's getting agreement. So you ask, do you agree? And that's really for the student's benefit. You're really not interested as much in their opinion about this. That's something you can discuss later. But the do you agree, if the student is unsure why you're telling them this, and if there's any confusion, you can clear that up then. Again, if you have time. Anaphylaxis, an active seizure, you may just need to say, okay, we need to take care of this ourselves, and then you will reel you back in. But for that urgent but not critical patient, this is another framework that you can give that points the student in the right direction, and they understand why. So that's prompting and debriefing. So we're going to talk about feedback. That's prompting now. So now we're going to go after the call. And there's two things. There's feedback and there's debriefing. And the feedback is short. It's one-sided. You're doing most of the talking, and you're telling the student what went well, what needs to be improved. And debriefing is a longer two-way discussion. And this is a guided reflection. And you're going to ask the student what happened. And then as you go along, you share your thoughts and observation. And this is longer, and you're not going to have time to do this on every call. And there's some calls where it would be nice to do this, but you're too busy to, and that's just going to have to be, good enough. But we'll talk about how this can be framed. So with feedback, students live in this area where they want to improve, and they want to get better, they want to pass, and they also have this identity. Most of them are insecure. I hope that they're a little insecure. The students who come in with inflated egos are the most dangerous, and I think the most difficult to work with. It's a lot easier to build someone up than it is to reel them and bring them down. And if that's the case, we need to know about it. That's not your responsibility to fix. That's on us. And if we do, we will address it too, and we will use feedback. We'll use this same frame. But they're thinking this is that same dialogue in their head, this extrinsic load that's impairing their performance. I'm a failure. I miss another IV. I'll never get an airway. They're all talking about how bad I am. And whether that's true or not, that's what they're thinking. And that is, so when you give feedback, you're trying to help them improve, but also preserve that identity. And this is where that relationship of trust comes in. This is like the safe learning environment. So you're trying to hit that in the middle, in that green area. That's like the unicorn, Goldilocks area for feedback. So one strategy for giving feedback is try to think of what needed to be done. You're going to do a little check yourself. And maybe if it's a stable patient, you can do this in the ambulance. Maybe you can do it in triage. Maybe you can get a few minutes in the medic room away from the student. So try to think about what needed to be done in order for the contact to be successful, or for any working paramedic to have accomplished, being successfully leading the call. And then try to compare that to some standard, and protocols are the best thing for this, and the stopwatch is another thing. So, and we do not want our paramedics to be cookbook medics at all. We want them to think critically and understand why they're doing everything that they're doing. But for this case, feedback is good for, the protocols are good because this is a common ground that no one can argue with. You interpreted the protocols, and for today, your way is the right way. And this is something that you have that's shared. This isn't your opinion. This isn't your standard. This is the state's standard of what needs to be done. So you have that, you can share that. And then think about 3 to 5 things in the context that are most important. That's all, and really 3 is better. That's all they're going to be able to process. You may have calls where 100 things go wrong. And it's like, where do you start? Well, you start at the most important things. And if you go through all 100, then they're only going to remember the last thing, and they're not going to remember the important stuff in the back. And then you compare the student specific actions to those. So what did they do? What needed to be done? The 3 to 5 things are most important things that needed to be done, and compare those to those. And you're going to leave some stuff off. So for example, if a blood sugar on a stroke patient, they absolutely need to get the blood sugar on a stroke patient. If they don't get the blood sugar, that would not be acceptable. If you had a patient with an altered mental status, it's bradycardic and hypotensive, and there was other issues, and maybe they didn't get to the blood sugar, that might be something that gets dropped off. Yes, it's something they should do. There are probably issues that were more important to address above that. We want you to document everything on an MC, but when you're talking about them, that might not make the cut. So you do have to do some triaging, and there will be some things that you don't get to. So for giving the feedback, and this is how we can navigate the coaching versus evaluation, and for the student to kind of clear their head and take in the feedback. So first, start with a self-reflection. They have the tool in MC for this. So if they're able to get to their phone or their the tablet, whatever, and do the self-evaluation. How do they feel the contact went? And you can start there, and that lets them think about it a little bit. And the next thing is to tell them if they passed or failed right away before they do anything. And there might be some things you need to clarify. You're not sure, did they ask for something, or there might be some issues that need to be clarified. But for the most part, just tell them right then if they passed or failed. Because if you imagine like taking a written test and you don't know how well you did, and then the teacher comes in and they start going over the test before you know whether you passed or not, the whole time they're going over the test, you're thinking, did I pass? Did I pass? Is that what I did? And that dialogue gets in the way of them processing the feedback that you're giving them. And then sometimes we'll go on another call, and in this, we're guilty of this too when we're teaching, and they'll do the same thing wrong again, and like, well, they just don't listen. Well, that may be because they're so busy in their mind that they can't process the feedback that you're giving him. So tell them if they passed or failed, and if there's any like argument or feelings about that, first of all, let us know right away. They can clear their hide and get that out before you start with the feedback. And there's a plus delta feedback tool. I'll attach a link to an article about this. It's this short that was in EMS World. And start by telling them what they did well and try to find something. That may be hard on some contexts, but try to find something that went well or something that was better than the last time, even if it's not acceptable yet. So try to share some way that something they either did well or a way that they're progressing. Share what about their performance needs to be changed. And then you compare those to get the protocols out or get the stopwatch out, how long it took them to implement the protocols before you had to prompt them. So compare it to the standard. And what this does, and then talk about the consequences, good and bad, what was not or not done. So they gave albuterol to a patient having an asthma attack. Good. They did not give salumedrol. Well, what's the consequence of that? Well, the albuterol will open their airways. The not giving salumedrol will keep the inflammation going. It doesn't have to be that deep. that's it can be superficial and simple. They don't need to go into too much depth about how solumetrol works, but just good and bad. This is quick, and this is the overall contact is not good or bad. That's the difference. These are interventions. This breaks it down. This makes it more black and white. This is what was done. This is what was not done, and this is why that's an issue. And the overall component wasn't good or bad. This is just the way it was. This is what happened, and that's it. And of course, we know no two FTOs are exactly alike, and we know that there's room for clinical judgment on calls. But if you use this framework, then this is a way that can help students take in your feedback, even if your style or your clinical judgment may be a little different than some other people. So finally, if you have time after you get the feedback, this is when you can debrief, and debriefing is really powerful. We're also assigning their PCRs to write. And that's part of reflecting on this too, and doing their own like personal debrief. So we need to change their actions, but we also need to change their frames. And when we think about what was their thought process in order to do this, so this is when we're actually going to go through and have the student walk through the call. And your tone of voice is so critical with this, because we're going to ask a lot of questions like, what were you thinking when you said this? Or what were you thinking when the patient told you something? Or I noticed that you did something. I noticed that you were reaching for the dextrose when we didn't have a blood sugar yet. And they're giving it your frames, because you're going to have this whole library of experience with you. You have your frames or your mental models that students don't have. So when you debrief, they share their mental models, they share what they were thinking and what they were doing. And by going through this process, they can change their mental model and adjust it to what is correct and change their actions. And so one model is gather, analyze, summarize for debriefing. And then debriefing, so feedback is instructor-led, and debriefing should be led by the student. You're going to be asking them like probing questions. Explain to me what happened, what you were thinking. And the gather, analyze, summarize frame, there's a number of these. This is the one that's used in American Heart courses. So if you teach one of the American Heart courses, and behind every case, they have this. It's gather, analyze, summarize, and they say they do about, if you're doing a 10-minute mega code, you spend about 6 minutes going through this. For the gather phase, they're going to offload their frustration and feelings. Like so if they're upset, maybe they're even disagreeing with you about whether or not the contact should have been successful or not. In which case, let us know. And they're offloading that frustration. They're just getting that frustration out. Maybe they're upset, then they're opening up the door for you to have a conversation with them. And then we're going to analyze, have the student go through the contact. So they should be doing the talking and explaining what they see from their perspective, and share what they were thinking at each point. And they're doing the talking, and you're kind of, it's almost like an interview. You're asking the questions. And then you're comparing what the student says that they saw and were thinking to what you saw and were thinking. And then the final thing, that love 3 to 5 things, we're going to summarize, what did you take away from this? And hopefully those 3 to 5 things match the things that you thought that you should address. But sometimes they don't. And then you can clarify that then before moving on. So this is one, I'm going to put a link in the notes for this to a TED Talk by Atul Gawande. Some of you may think he's best known for writing the Checklist Manifesto. He's a surgeon in Boston, and he's written a number of books. And he did a TED Talk that's about 25 minutes, and he talks about doing work at a maternity ward in India. And these are nurses who knew the textbook knowledge. They had been through this. They just needed to learn how to apply them better and work better as a team. and he'll talk about the outcomes that he had with that. And this is, and I watched that and I thought, this is what you're all doing. You are all taking people with a limited skill set and knowledge base from actually performing things in the field, and you're transitioning them, and you're using what they've learned in class in real world situations and helping them learn how to impact as a team. And he talks about the outcomes that he had, and think about the outcome. It's immeasurable, the outcome, the outcomes that you're creating by training the next generation of paramedics and hopefully some of your future colleagues. So to close, these are 5 things that I hope you took away from this, if we're in the summarize phase. So students learn best and improve the most in a safe learning environment. And if you have questions, or we can certainly discuss that more. So 2 crew resource management strategies, SBAR and appreciative inquiry. You can use those to prompt so that it gives them timely redirects care, and also improves, they understand why they're being prompted. Let students know if they passed before giving feedback on why they passed or failed. So start with that. Let them get any frustration out before giving them the feedback. So plus delta takes away, makes feedback objective. It's not as much good or bad. It's what needed to happen and what actually happened. And then we're going to debrief on build the feedback and learn how to improve performance. This is on the student to guide and do themselves. So thank you again for your attention. There will be some more information and resources on this stuff in the show notes. And take care, stay safe, and I will be in touch with all of you soon.